Hello everybody, my name is Alex, also known as Robert, and this is GameMaker Basics Part 4. In this video, we're going to focus on player animation. Let's go ahead and run our game so we see what we have. And what we have right now is our player and these rocks. We can move, great, we can bump into the rocks, however, something's not quite right? The player doesn't really look like he's moving correctly. Two things are wrong here. Number one, he's not animating, as in like his feet should move or something when he's walking. And number two, he's not facing the direction that he's moving, right? If I'm moving to the left, I should be facing left. If I'm moving up, I should be facing up. So we're going to go ahead and fix that right now. So obviously our character is like a type of sprite that it really wouldn't make sense to just rotate it, because that's one easy way to make a character look like he's walking a certain way. Simply rotate him, counterclockwise or clockwise to make him look like he's facing that direction. However, this perspective of our character really wouldn't make sense if we were to rotate him. We can go in here, and I believe there's a rotate effect. Yeah, see, there's rotate all frames 90. So we could rotate him to look technically to the left, but that really wouldn't work, right? So what we're going to have to do is basically just add a new sprite to this sprite, or a new image to this sprite. So let's go ahead and undo this. There we go. So yeah, that brings us to one little concept here. A sprite is not necessarily just one image. A sprite can be composed of many images. In fact, if you click this plus square up here, you can go ahead and add an empty canvas, in which case you can go into it and then, you can draw basically another frame for your character. And if you hit this little play button right here, you can actually animate between those all your frames in your sprite to see how it would look like in game. And indeed, if we were to run the game, our hero sprite is gonna automatically animate between all our images. In GameMaker, they're called sub images, basically. So if I say images or sub images, it's the same thing. I'm basically referring to the actual graphics that compose our sprite. I'm gonna go ahead and stop that. And so basically what we're gonna do is just import a graphic of our hero facing it in every direction. That way we can then program it to actually face in the direction that we're walking. So what you can do is basically double click back here, and you can just click on this import, and you can actually select every file or multiple files and open them all at the same time, and it's gonna automatically, boom, put them into your sprite. Now what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna rearrange these a little bit so that the facing right images are first, and then facing up is second, facing left, and then facing down are my last two. Now, as you can see, I have two images per direction. If you hit play, you can see how I'm cycling through every direction. He's like going in a circle. That's kind of mesmerizing. Also, what you can do here is see, actually, you know what? I'm going to delete all but the first two so I can demonstrate the animation a little better. Right, that's how it would look like when I'm walking right. Now, obviously, that looks a little too fast. Like, I don't want my character to actually walk that quickly. So what you can do here is click on the speed button and slow it down. The smaller the number, the slower it's going to animate. So if we go down to 5 or 4, now it looks like a more natural little march. And that's basically how it's going to look like in the game. In fact, let's just go ahead and run it now. And yep, see? Obviously, I'm only facing right for now, but when I'm actually moving to the right, it looks like I'm actually walking in that direction. Cool. Nice little animating sprites makes a big difference. So let's go ahead and re-import all our images again, though. And I'm going to go ahead and put them back in that same order. So I have them back in that order that I want. And we're pretty much done with the hero sprite. I guess it goes without saying that you kind of want to design your sprites to be all of the same size, so that it all matches and looks good. So now let's go back into our hero object. And this is where we're going to actually force our sprite, our hero, to face and to use the correct sprite, right? Because right now, if we run the game, it's just going to cycle through every direction continuously, regardless of what direction we're actually moving. So we have to tell GameMaker, okay, use these two certain sprites when you're facing south, use these two sprites when you're facing north, and so on and so on. So how do we tell GameMaker which direction we're facing? Well, that part is actually kind of easy because we're already getting all this information from the player. We're getting the input of what direction he wants to move. So basically, we can just piggyback off this code. And so when the player hits left, well, we can just assume that we're going to want to face left. So let's just make a variable called facing, and make it basically left. However, we don't want to use like a string variable, right? We could set this to a number. And so each number would represent a direction, kind of. So facing right would be 1, and then facing or moving up would be 2, facing, and then facing down would be 3. And then we can just check, okay, well, if facing equals 1, do this. If facing equals 2, do that. However, again, we always want to make our code make sense and make it very readable. And these numbers kind of don't mean anything. They're just arbitrary numbers that we came up with. We really want to use, ideally, a word like left or something. However, if we want to use left, we would have to make it a string. And ideally, you don't want to use strings when you're making lots of comparisons and lots of checks. I don't want to get into the details, but strings are slow. We want to stick to numbers. So this is a great opportunity to introduce something called enumerations. And where you want to create the enumeration is basically in the create event. Now, basically, an enumeration is just numbers. However, it's a kind of a convenience thing in GameMaker, and it lets us use a word as a number. It might be a little confusing, but when I actually make this, it'll hopefully make sense. When you make an enumeration, you're going to make a set of values usually, and you have to give that set a name. So we're going to make it face directions. It's a little long of a name, but I wanted to make it very clear what this set of values is. And the directions that we're going to work with are those cardinal directions. So we're going to have east. We're going to, east. It auto-completed a bunch of garbage in there. And then, of course, north, and then west, and then south. And in enumeration, we can assign a number to this value, basically, kind of just like a variable. And so we're going to give this guy 0. And we're not going to give north 1. Instead, we're going to give it 90. And I'll explain that a little later. But we're going to give west 270. And then we're going to give south. Actually, we're going to give south 270. And west is 180. Basically, in GameMaker, there's obviously, an actual direction attribute for every object. Like if our hero can like shoot a fireball or something, and we want to tell that fireball to move in a direction. If we want it to move, to the right, we would give it a direction of 0. And if we want to make it go up, we would give it a direction value of 90. Obviously, there are 360 degrees in a circle, and basically going right is 0, up is 90 degrees, left is 180 degrees, and down is 270 degrees. That's just how GameMaker works. Other programs and other pieces of software have their own way of handling the 360 degrees. In GameMaker, basically, like I said, the right is 0, up 90, left 180, and south is 270. And so we're setting those values in our enumerations for future, use. If we ever do want to make our hero shoot a fireball, well, we can just reference which direction he's facing east, north, west, south, and we're going to be able to take those numbers that those words represent and then make our fireball move accordingly. Again, it's a future proofing type of thing, which may not make a lot of sense right now, but trust me, it's going to help us out in multiple ways. And it's going to help us out right now because now we don't have to worry about really those numbers. We don't have to worry about 0 being east and west being 180 because we can just reference the enumeration. So our current facing variable, which we are initializing right here, is going to be looking south. So we reference an enumeration value by doing face direction, the name of our set of values, dot, and then it actually auto completes whatever direction we want. So let's go with south. That means we're going to start facing down, south. And we don't have to worry about that actually being 270. We can just type in south, down, and we don't have to worry about memorizing numbers and stuff. So over here, when we move left, we can just set our facing direction to face directions dot left, well, in this case is west. And let's go ahead and just copy that and put it in every direction. This would be east. Going up would be, of course, north. And going down would be south. So now we're setting our facing variable. You know, whenever we hit a keyboard, arrow key, we're telling the game, okay, this is the direction we're facing. Cool. So now that the game knows which way we're facing, now we can tell the game, okay, depending on which way you're facing, use the appropriate sprite graphics. So down here, we're gonna go ahead and animation. This is where we're gonna handle our animation. This is where we're gonna tell GameMaker, hey, use this sprite. So one attribute I need to talk about is image index. Image index is simply the current sub-image that our graphics, that our object is using. So if I set this to 3, just like that, what does 3 mean in this case? Image index, like I said, is referencing our sprite. And if we go into our sprite, this first sub-image is the 0, 1. This is the first, second, and third. So therefore, if I'm setting our image index to 3, that means this graphic of our hero's back is what the game is setting our sprite to. So I'm always gonna have that sprite of my hero's back displayed because I'm setting it every single step here in the step event. I'm setting it to 3. Okay, so that's what image index does. It sets our sub image. If this is 0, then it's always going to show the first sub image. If this is 2, then it's always going to show the third one. The third one, because remember, in programming, numbers start at 0. So 0 is the first one, 1 is the second one, 2 is the third one, and so on. Good. So that's how we can change our image index. Of course, we need to check which way we're facing before we set that graphic. So we can do if, facing is equal to facing directions. Why isn't it coming up? Directions. Oh, it's face directions, my bad. Face directions. If it's the same as east, then use image index, right? 0. Or set our image index to 0. And then, if we're facing west, then use, 4. I'm not really looking at what it's supposed to be. Actually, let's make this north and make this west and make this south. So we just, we're checking for the 4 things and we're setting our graphic to be a different thing. Let's do 2 and 4 and 6. And that technically is going to work. Now, if we're facing east, it's going to use that graphic. If we're facing west, it's going to use that graphic. If we're going up, like that. So that kind of works. Yeah, it does. However, it's kind of inefficient. Number one, it's not animating. So we're gonna have to do some more shenanigans to make it cycle between our two graphics of him walking. But also we're repeating a lot of code here. We're repeating this facing and this equals and all this stuff, and it seems kind of pointless to do all this checks. This is where switch commands come into play. A switch is basically kind of like it is a conditional statement, but it's basically gonna allow us to check through multiple values a lot quicker and a lot more efficient. So the way you write a switch statement is you start off with switch, and then you basically give it the value that you're checking. In this case, we're checking our face value, our facing value, and then basically you're gonna write, instead of writing if this value, we're simply gonna put the value that it could be. So in this case, facing can be only 4 values, and it could be face directions, right? East, west, north, south. So those are the only 4 values that this variable can equal. And now we don't have to actually explicitly write all that if else stuff. This is a lot more concise than all those if statements. Of course, after each case, though, you have to write break. Because if you don't, then it's just going to go through each case. I'm not going to go over the details of how switch statements work exactly, but just know that after each case, you have to have a break. And the code for each of these cases is going to reside between the case value and the break. So what do we want to actually do here? Well, remember, we're changing the image index, right? After we determine all this logic, we're going to actually set image index of our character object to something. Remember, we have 2 subimages per direction. So we're going to have to somehow set a range of animation for each direction that we're facing. And so if we're gonna define a range, the easiest way to do that is to define the beginning of the range and the end of the range. So we're gonna create a variable called start image index, which is telling us which sub image to start animating from. And we already know, right? If we go into our sprite, if we're facing right, then it's the 0 subimage and the 1 subimage. That's it. 0 and 1. That's all we want. If we're going north up, then we want the 2nd subimage and the 3rd, and then so on and so on. So we can just reference those values in the image editor, and explicitly state what our range is going to be. Instead of start, we're going to do end. Now, technically, you'd think that this would be 1, right? Because it's starting at 0, and then we're ending on the first one. However, if we do this, you're going to see that's not going to quite work, but I'll leave it like that for now, so we can see why it needs to be a 2. But if we're facing north, remember, it's the 2nd and 3rd subimage. If we're facing west, it was the 4th and 5th subimage. And if we're going south, it is subimage number 6 and subimage number 7. That makes sense, right? Because we have 8 images in our sprite. Therefore, the last one would be index 7. So we just defined a range of our animation. Cool. However, we have to make sure that when we're animating that we're staying within that range. So if our actual image index ever goes past our end image index, which we're defining right above, if it's ever greater than our end or smaller than image index is ever smaller than our start image index, well, then go ahead and set it to the beginning of the range that we already defined. Start image index, right? So we're making sure that our current image index is always within the range that we just defined depending on the direction that we're facing. So if we were to run the game now, the subimage does change when we change direction. However, it's not animating, and that's because image indexes are not always whole numbers. They're actually cycling through through fractional values, right? Instead of going 0, 1, 2, 3, they go 0 and then 0.1 and 0.2, 0.3 to 1 and then 1.1, 1.2, 1.3. So that's just how it is because of how the images cycle and the image speed. So image index isn't always a whole number. And basically as a fraction, if we go into the sprite and this is the 0 subimage, this is the 1 subimage, even though the image index might be a fraction, 0.1, it's still going to show the first subimage, and then at some point, like at 0.9, and then once it jumps to 1, then it'll switch to the next subimage. So basically what I'm saying, it's a little weird. It's a little quirk. I mean, it's not a bug, that's just how GameMaker works. So that's why you have to compensate for that, for those fractional subimages, by setting this end image index basically to one number greater. Webstone, I screwed it up. It's 022446. Then technically 8, even though we don't have 8, but that's fine. And then down here we have to do greater than or equal to. Again, we gotta compensate for the fractional image indexes and just how it works. So now if we run it, you can see that I'm actually animating between my two sub-images for the facing down and then for the facing right, for the facing up, and the facing left. Cool. Now that makes a big difference right now. Instead of just sliding around in a weird way, he's actually animating, and he actually looks like he's actually walking with his stubby little legs. So there you go. That's image index and animating sprites. Like I said, yeah, you just have to know that modifying the image index is what changes the object's image or graphic. And we're defining a range because I wanted to keep everything in one sprite. We could have had separate sprites. One sprite that's hero facing down, one sprite hero facing left, one sprite for facing north, and then we could just change the hero sprite accordingly. But I want to keep everything in one sprite. That's why we're kind of jumping through a couple of hoops here. But ultimately, I think this system is pretty good because since we're defining a range, we could easily, if we wanted to have more frames of animation, you would just slot them in or whatever. And then we would simply redefine our range. If our facing east sub-images was like 10 sub-images, then that's fine. We would simply redefine our range from 0 to 10, and it would still work. Our logic would still work. We would just have to redo our range values, but it would still totally work. But anyways, that's the game. That's the animation. We're going to go ahead and end it here. This is a short video. Just wanted to get this animation done. As always, if you found this video helpful, go ahead and hit that like button. Until then, I will see you on the next video. Thank you.